I watched through the game console's screen as Mr. Wilson's hands wrapped around his wife's throat, squeezing tightly. This wasn't your usual Christmas gift. This wasn't just another game. Was I actually the one in control? Or was I really out of control? I was known as the man who had everything, especially when it came to gaming. My elderly parents, so grateful to have a child at all, had always buckled to my fractious demands and given me whatever I wanted when I was a kid. The latest consoles and devices, the newest releases, the most expensive setups, all demanded, never earned. My parents' attempts to teach me about earning my rewards were met with calculated tantrums that always ended with them giving in. And as for gratitude, nothing they did ever made me feel it. As an adult, I now earn vast sums of money designing games, so I either got free kid or simply bought myself whatever I wanted. From a small boy, I didn't like anyone having anything better than I did. At school, I reduced my bestie, Tommy Parker, to tears because his parents could only afford the previous year's console. I filmed it on my phone and posted it online. Better ask Santa for some real gaming gear, I sneered, watching him try to hide his second-hand controller. The video went viral in our school. Tommy stopped coming to classes that week, and he also stopped being my friend. I told myself it was funny. After all, his parents really cared. They'd buy him better stuff, right? He wasn't my only victim at school. Sarah Chen's handheld console accidentally ended up in a puddle after she beat my high score, and Mark Rodriguez's collectible game cards mysteriously vanished after he refused to trade his rare ones to me. I was the king of my digital domain, and everyone else was just a non-player character in my world. These days I had outgrown the childish pranks, but also there didn't seem to be anyone around me to prank on, let alone friends. I had moved back into my parents' old house a few years ago. They had both passed away, and I decided I might as well go back to the old place. After all, it still housed all the kit I'd ever bought, and it was like a techie museum. Nothing much changed in our street, but some new neighbours called the Wilsons had moved in over the road a few weeks ago. They were everything I hated. Cheerful, generous, always helping others. Mr. Wilson spent his evenings helping elderly neighbours with their Christmas lights. Mrs. Wilson organised the neighbourhood charity drive, collecting gifts for kids who couldn't afford a proper Christmas. Kids like Tommy, I realised with a smirk. Their house quickly became a beacon of Christmas spirit, covered in stunning handcrafted decorations that made my small tokenistic LED display look hollow in comparison. Looking up occasionally from my computer screen, I would catch sight of them through the window as they warmly welcomed whatever needy or poor person was knocking at their front door. The package arrived a week before Christmas. No return address, just my name in strange frost-like letters that shimmered daintily in the porch light. The wrapping paper was the deepest crimson red, marked with symbols that seemed to burn into my retinas if I looked at them too long. Attached was a note, written in the same shimmering script, for a man who needs to learn how it feels to be played. I tore up the note with the disdain it deserved and wondered what sort of new marketing ploy this was. I ripped off the thick paper and opened the plain cardboard box. Inside was a console unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Deepest matte black, with intricate patterns like frozen icicles across its surface. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally cold, and its sleep mode power light pulsed red like a beating heart. The controller felt exquisitely balanced and exotic in my hands, like it was made of ice that molded to my touch, yet couldn't melt. So, whilst the neighbourhood slept under its blanket of Christmas lights, I pressed the power button on. Instead of the usual startup animation, the screen stayed black for several long seconds, then static. Then utter brilliant clarity flashed up. What I saw made me drop both my jaw and the controller. There was Mr. Wilson's living room, exactly as I'd seen it through their window earlier that day, the Christmas tree lights pulsing softly in the corner. Everything was in perfect detail, like I was watching a reality TV show. A crosshair floated in the center of the screen, glowing faintly red. When I picked up the controller again and experimentally moved the joystick, I watched Mr. Wilson shuffle around in his Christmas pajamas, his movements slightly stiff and robotic. Each movement he made was perfect, precise, matching exactly what motion I made on that eerily cold controller. I tried to make Mr. Wilson do a much more complex movement and open his curtains. As I admired the way he smoothly drew back the thick tapestried material, my attention was distracted by a bright beam of light suddenly appearing from over the road. I peered outside, and I could see Mr. Wilson's hand lit up, resting on his curtain. How odd. He had pulled back his curtains at exactly the same time I had made him do it in the game. I looked back at my screen, and the icy controller moved deliciously in my hand as I got him to close the curtain. The shaft of light over the road disappeared. So I repeated the action. The same response over the road. Light billowed out, his hand clearly outlined as he performed the command. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a game. This was control. Real, perfect control over another human being. And the rush it gave me was better than anything I had ever known. At first, I tested the waters cautiously. Made him go to fix a midnight snack. Made him stub his toe on a chair. But as the night wore on, my actions grew bolder. I made him knock over his beautifully decorated Christmas tree. Made him delete the charity drive spreadsheets from his computer. Watching him cut up the Santa suit he was supposed to wear the next day for the neighborhood kids was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. The power was intoxicating. Every click of a button, every push of the joystick made him dance to my tune. Days passed, and I grew more daring, watching him both on and off screen, snapping at carolers and telling off charity volunteers. I watched through the screen as confusion and fear grew in Mrs. Wilson's eyes, as neighbors started whispering behind their hands. Christmas Day was when I went too far. I was alone again this year, a not uncommon situation for me. The Wilsons had invited the neighborhood's less fortunate families for a traditional festive dinner. I watched them arriving and saw in surprise Tommy's family turn up. I hadn't seen them since our school days. They looked worn out and depressed. After they all left, I watched smugly through the screen as Mrs. Wilson confronted her husband about the sabotaged charity gifts and his increasingly erratic behavior. Mr. Wilson's confusion had me crying with laughter. I made him scream manically in her face, made him tell her how stupid her Christmas spirit was, how pathetic she was for caring about worthless families like Tommy's. When she fearfully threatened to call the police, I made him grab her. I didn't mean to hold quite so hard, or necessarily by the throat, but in the heat of the moment, I forgot this wasn't just another game, and my hands moved the controller with a life of their own. Exhausted now, my eyes closed as I stretched back into my state-of-the-art gaming chair and slept. I awoke suddenly, startled by the sound of sirens. Mrs. Wilson lay limp on the front lawn, amongst the debris of broken decorations. Mr. Wilson stood mutely by. He made no explanation, spoke no defense. I watched them lead him away, his Christmas pajamas covered in mud, while the neighbors, the same ones he'd helped with Christmas lights just days ago, filmed it on their phones. His confusion, his terror, it all went viral. I told myself it was just another cutscene game sequence. It had no real consequences. Idly, it occurred to me again that I had zero idea where this console was from, who had made it, or who had sent it to me. Tonight, as Christmas carols drift through my window, I sit next to the glowing console in front of the dim screen. I wonder if I will be able to control Mr. Wilson now he's in a prison cell. I move the joystick, but instead of a game menu popping up, I see dozens of images like a wall of security feeds. In one, Mr. Wilson rocks back and forth in his cell, mumbling about being possessed. In another, Tommy Parker sits alone in his room, too afraid to go out. I witness Mrs. Wilson's sister packing up their Christmas decorations, crying. A collection of lives I've ruined, playing on endless repeat. And, in the center screen, I see myself. My hands fly across the keyboard, manically typing words, but I'm not controlling them. I've been typing for hours, days, years. The security feed shares news items showing time passing, trials, convictions, lives destroyed. But in my gaming room, it's always Christmas Day. Sometimes the screens show me what could have been. Mr. Wilson teaching his grandchildren how to build snowmen. Mrs. Wilson retiring from a lifetime of charity work. Tommy becoming a successful musician, happily married with 2 kids. All these futures I erased, playing out like alternative save files I can never access. The console's red power light pulses steadily, marking time in my eternal Christmas day. I can't turn it off, can't look away, can't stop typing these confessions that no one will ever read. My punishment isn't being controlled, it's being forced to watch on eternal repeat what I've done, to witness every life I've damaged, every future I've corrupted, playing out in perfect high-definition detail. The screen flickers, and I see a young woman plugging in the new matte black console, covered in a familiar frozen design, her face filled with the same cruel excitement I once felt. My hands start typing again, desperate to warn her, but I know it's pointless. Some games don't end, even when you've had enough of them, and it seemed this game would never end at all. Thank you so much for watching our latest video. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the notification bell to keep up to date with newly released stories. And please feel free to comment about what you liked or didn't like and what subjects and themes you'd like explored in future releases. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.